Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. In a world of celebrity and true crime podcasts, you might not be tempted to listen to a conversation with a city controller. But this is where being an Honorable Profession listener pays off, because my conversation with Pittsburgh Controller Rachael Heisler is going to be the best thing you hear this week. We talked about the challenges of urban budgets as office buildings remain empty, how you build trust with your community, fight for what's right, and campaign in the swingiest of swing states. Rachel's the first guest from our new class of New Dealers, and she's fantastic. Enjoy. Pittsburgh Controller Rachael Heisler, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you, Ryan. Glad to be here today.
I'm going to start with a question that my guess is on many of our listeners' minds, which is, what is a controller and why should I care?
So in Pittsburgh, the city controller is the third branch of government. So the mayor is the executive, the legislative branch is the city council, and that check and balance on the rest of city government is the city controller. We don't have a judicial department. So our office has three core functions. We're known as the Watchdog in our city's home rule charter. But the city controller's office in Pittsburgh has three core functions. One, the accounting function. We manage the city's books. The accounts payable function, we pay the city's bills, and then the auditing function, which evaluates city spending for economy, efficiency, and scale. So that's what we do. We make sure tax dollars go to what they're supposed to go to, and they're spent in accordance to legislation that was passed, the contract that was signed, and for the health and safety of the people who will use, whether it's a public infrastructure project or a professional service that is serving the city, we make sure that money is spent the way it's supposed to be spent.
So I have to ask, because I think, you are doing what all Americans want to an elected official to do, which is to be accountable, to ensure that their hard-earned tax dollars are spent well. But I imagine that doesn't make you always popular with other elected officials. And so can you talk about how the interplay of the politics of being an elected official yourself with the responsibility that comes with the office, how do you navigate that?
So the politics of the politics, I was sworn in January. So this is something I'm still actually navigating myself. And it's something that is probably pretty obvious that I had not anticipated. But most cities in America are actually dealing with similar crises right now as it relates to municipal finance. Downtowns are contracting in the tax base. Downtown properties are less than they were worth 5 years ago, right? The pandemic has changed work forever. So for me, what I've tried to do, and my approach has just been to be about the numbers and about the issue we're facing, and to not make it a personality versus a personality. Math kind of speaks for itself and spreadsheets speak for themselves. So I try to just talk about the numbers. And I also think it's important to recognize that the problems that Pittsburgh is facing are really not unique to Pittsburgh. Like I mentioned, these are post-pandemic issues that, and to varying degrees, but most cities are dealing with. So New York City's dealing with it. Washington, D.C. is dealing with it. LA is dealing with it. Chicago's dealing with it. Dallas is dealing with it. So all these cities, are trying to figure out what to do in this post-COVID environment. And what has especially strained Pittsburgh is we have a heavy reliance on our deed transfer tax. It's at 5%, which is the highest in the country. And with interest rates being where they had been up until last week, home sales have slowed. So, we aren't seeing those real estate transactions happen with homes like we were seeing throughout the pandemic. So those two factors, which again are not unique to Pittsburgh, are the things that we're really dealing with in our local economy. And I've tried to focus on those issues and to articulate as frequently as I can that this is not the byproduct of any administration or any elected official, that this is just the post-COVID economy. So that's how I've dealt with it. But it is a new part of this job that is something you have to navigate and you learn as you go. And people do pay attention to how you position problems and the solutions. And I think most people who are paying attention are realizing that this is a natural thing to do, and are recognizing that this is not a personal attack.
So how have you learned? I mean, I know it's relatively recent, but how have you learned to deliver not great news, and to give the folks information that they need, but that obviously has political consequences, and in a swing state where people are, the whole world may be paying attention to what's going on there?
Yeah, the swing state thing is also a fun added bonus. I have really, in how we're handling it is in March and April, we started having conversations with the mayor's administration, members of city council, talking about the significant changes that we had seen in our downtown commercial properties and ways to deal with that, right? So the city council has passed ALERTA, which here is a tax abatement plan in the state of Pennsylvania, to incentivize conversion of downtown commercial buildings to residential. And we're going to enter 2 really lean years financially. And the mayor's administration has recognized that, responded appropriately. We've had productive conversations as it relates to budgeting next year and the 4 years after. The federal government obviously budgets in 10-year windows. We budget in 5. So those 2 things, I think, just having those honest conversations at the beginning and trying to get on the same page with people is how I've decided, to approach things. And making sure that we're communicating, what we're seeing to state and federal lawmakers and making sure that they understand what we're dealing with as a municipality. And again, I think it helps that this is not this is not a problem that is only in Pittsburgh. This is happening across the state and across the country. But for me, that's how we decided to approach it. It's just like, look, these are the modifications that we think need to be made in the budget. We had a valuation come in from a building that's literally 2 doors down from the city county building, which is where I work out of. And that cost the city $750,000, one property adjustment. Wow. Yeah, per year. And so because there's a delay, the courts are now just catching up into 2023. So we'll be getting basically bad news about downtown property values for the next, I would estimate, at least year. And the hard impact is going to be felt when leases expire. So think about it. If you signed a lease in June of 2019, usually those leases are 10 years. So in June of 2029, when a company elects not to renew a commercial lease downtown or has a significantly smaller footprint, that makes the building then worth less. And that property owner will then file a property assessment appeal. And they're not wrong, right? And again, this is not unique to Pittsburgh. It's something that's really, I'm curious with what federal lawmakers, how they respond to this, because I think it's this acute impact, but it's across cities, happening to cities across the country. And there's going to have to be a creative response because these buildings, they're half empty if we're lucky. And I think that it's going to change how downtowns look. And we need to turn them into learning centers. We need to turn them into cultural centers. How can we bring people downtown and down to downtowns for things other than 9-to-5 work?
Yeah, I was going to ask, have you seen any changes as we record this? I think Amazon had an interesting announcement the other day. They return to work 5 days a week. And I'm wondering, what that looks like both internally within the city in terms of how you see you're running your office and the organization as a whole, and then often also with private employers in Pittsburgh.
So I do think there should be, I would love to see incentives to bring people back downtown for 9 to 5 work, or from, maybe that's 3 days a week. I do believe that to attract and retain talent for positions that allow for some flexibility, employers are going to have to afford that. I was sworn in on January 8th, and that week we started a mandatory 3 days a week in the office. There are some employees in our office who have never had the opportunity to work from home. We have inspectors that go out and review projects, and for a year and a half, they've took 2 vehicles instead of 1. But we print checks. We literally pay the city's bills, and you can't print checks from your home HP printers. So, we've had people here throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic. We do have accountants that do a lot of work that they can do from home, and auditors that do work that they can do from home. So for those folks and people in a category that permits telework, they can work from home no more than 2 days a week. So some people are here 5 days a week, no matter what. Other people come in those 3 days and they elect to work from home. But I just think employers need to be creative in this new environment, because there is a medium between the benefits of in-person collaboration and retaining talent. And if you can work remotely 3 days a week from one place, or 2 days a week from one place, and the other place is mandatory in the office, you're competing. We don't have municipal employees are not as well compensated generally as their private sector counterparts. So I think affording some level of flexibility when we can is important. And there are obviously, there are people that work for city government that have, police officers have been at work throughout since March of 2020, firefighters, paramedics, et cetera. So I think it just is a happy balance. In Pittsburgh, we've seen growth. We have a downtown university. It's called Point Park University. They've continued to grow and to occupy space that was previously occupied by commercial property owner or commercial space. Our cultural district in Pittsburgh continues to grow. We did a lot during the pandemic and have maintained outdoor dining options downtown, which has actually been quite popular. So things that we can do as a municipality to incentivize people to come downtown, whether it's activities. The city has a wonderful relationship with the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, which actually facilitates a lot of that activity downtown. We have for anyone who's interested, we have something called Picklesburg that happens in July that is actually one of the biggest attractions in Pittsburgh. It starts on a Thursday, goes through Sunday. Everything is pickled flavored, beer, ice cream, you name it.
Wow.
So yeah, true story. I went for 2 days this year. It's a lot of fun, but we have a lot of downtown fun, interesting downtown programming. And I think cities just have to get creative, work with, whether they're folks in the nonprofit or the corporate sector, to get things moving. But I do think that we have a long way to go.
The Pickle Festival, it's just down the road. We have the Garlic Festival where you can have garlic flavored ice cream and other delicious treats.
I love garlic. I love garlic, but garlic flavored ice cream is.
Yeah, you gotta dig in. I think after you go to both those festivals, you could go to an antacid festival somewhere. So did you grow up wanting to be a controller? No. Public finance, your passion in high school? How did you find yourself in this position?
I went to college to be a Spanish teacher, and here I am. So public education was the family business. My grandfather was a teacher. His brothers were all teachers. My mom's a retired teacher now. My aunt and uncle are teachers. My cousins are teachers. I went to college. I'm from Central Pennsylvania. I grew up 3 hours away. My mom is from Western Pennsylvania. I wanted to live near my grandparents all of my life. And my freshman year of high school, my favorite teacher, who happened to be my Spanish teacher, had up a Pitt flag, the University of Pittsburgh flag in her classroom. And I came home and I was like, oh my gosh, I can go to Pitt and I can live near grandma. My grandma lived an hour away. But to me, that was a lot closer. So I came to Pitt, I had a brief stint in DC, but I fell in love with good government and politics in college. I switched my major to the disappointment of my parents, and I worked for a member of Congress for 6 years out of college. And after I left the Altmaier office, I worked for Congressman Altmaier for the entire time he was in the U.S. Congress. He left in D.C. in January 2013. His term ended, and the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform had just come out with their findings. That was the Simpson-Bowles Commission for non-policy nerds, and there was the first government shutdown of the modern era. That discussion was going on at the end of that year. I was actually in the Capitol building on New Year's Eve in 2012. And I didn't know a lot about that issue. I didn't know about the national debt. I didn't know about the federal budget. I didn't know anything. And so what I did, as one does, is I applied for a job at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget because I wanted to learn about the federal budget and national debt. And Maya McGinnis, who runs that organization, hired me, and I was there for 7 years. I moved back to Pittsburgh before the pandemic and was working remotely. And I fell in love with good government work. I think it's so important. People, if you want people to trust government, you have to show them that they can trust government. And talking about these issues and talking about federal spending and talking about now I primarily focus obviously on local spending and how our city government spends money. But I just think it creates trust in government, which is what we all want, right? If you love government, you want people to trust it. And in halfway through 2020, I got word that the deputy controller position was open. So I, like I mentioned, I was just sworn in January. So I aggressively emailed the then city controller, who has since become my friend. His name's Michael Lamb. I just was like, please interview me, please interview me, please interview me. And I finally got an interview. We sat 8 feet apart at a Dunkin' Donuts outside in the fall of 2020. And I was subsequently hired, and I started as deputy city controller in January of 2021. And I loved that job. I had so much fun. And my boss, Controller Liam, told me in the summer of 2022 that he was not going to run for re-election and was going to instead run for a different office. And so I was like, well, I love my job. And the deputy controller position is an appointment. It's not part of the civil service. And I started to become almost distressed because I just wanted to keep my job as deputy controller. And then, as you're having these conversations, like, how can I stay in this job? It actually occurred to me that I could run for the controller position, and that's the way to stay in the controller's office. So I started, talking to folks and figuring out how to put the pieces together. I formally launched my campaign in December of 2022. And then my primary was in May of last year, May of 2023. So I was very fortunate. I earned the Labor Council endorsement and the Democratic Committee endorsement, which are both pretty instrumental in low visibility races like the city controller race. And I told everybody at the beginning, and I stand by this, that I would work hardest of everybody who was in the field for the city controller's race. And I feel like I was able to do that. I hit 5,000 doors on my own. Our campaign hit 10,000. And it was really fun. I loved running for office. I mean, I've said this to people, and actually this is on my Instagram story because someone recorded my speech that I gave on election night. But running for office is literally the most humbling thing you can do, because you're literally at someone's door saying, please vote for me in a race that you don't, I would start my pitch saying, this is what the city controller does, which is like, not, you're like, do you know what the city controller does? And they're like, no. And I said, okay, well, I'd go through, and then I'm like, please vote for me. So it was so much fun. I loved it. And then I was unopposed in the general election. So I could, I didn't have to, I ran in November and I was still doing political work, but I didn't have an actual campaign.
We'll be back to this conversation after this short break.
American democracy has reached a moment of existential uncertainty, with problems bigger than any one administration or headline. My name is James Wallner, and I host the podcast Politics in Question with Lee Drutman and Julia Azari. On our show, we discuss how our political institutions are failing us, and we consider different ideas for fixing them. If you like this episode, you might enjoy Politics in Question. You can find that episode and the rest of our show on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and at our website, politicsinquestion.com.
What was the response when you knocked on a door and started talking about the controller's office responsibilities for fiscal health of the city?
So Pittsburgh actually went into effectively pre-bankruptcy. It's state oversight it's called Act 47 in Pennsylvania in December of 2004. No, December of 2003. So people in Pittsburgh they don't know necessarily what the duties and responsibilities of the controller's office are or were. I'd like to say we're changing that, but they understand the need for fiscal health with the city. Act 47 we had layoffs of police officers, layoffs of the municipal workforce. Things were in a really, really bad place in December of that year. And it was the byproduct, it was the steel industry slowly shut down in the 70s. The city went from a population of about 750,000 to about 300, at that point, like 350,000. And now we're right around 300. So people here actually are aware of the need to maintain our fiscal health because of that. I almost would call it a trauma because when you lay off, 10% of the city's workforce, someone who was laid off, right? Your municipal workers are in every single neighborhood in the city. So I didn't necessarily talk about Act 47, but the idea of maintaining the city's financial health did resonate with voters. So, I talked about the three branches of government, and then often the conversation would lead back to Act 47. And I would say, we have to make sure we don't go back there again. And these are the things we can do. And these are the actions that we can take if we get there, if we are approaching that. And I promise to be a watchdog. And that resonated with people because they don't want to see, their police officers laid off. They want to see the city safe and clean. And the way we do that is through maintaining the city's financial health.
Is there anything that surprised you from moving from the deputy role to an elected official role about how different or maybe even similar the job is?
My Controller Lamb, my predecessor, said I made the comment to somebody last summer that I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a big change. And he looked at me and he said, it's different when your name's on the door. And I had no idea what that meant. And now I can tell you it's different when your name's on the door. I don't know that anything is surprising because I know this office. I love this office. That's the reason I wanted to run is it's so much fun. But it is when your name's on something and your name's on a report or your name's on, you just feel this sense of ownership that I think you can't articulate until you're in a position. You were formerly an elected mayor. So that I think that, and it's also just this huge honor. I mean, my name is going to be in these books forever. And there's a huge responsibility that comes with that, but it just is such this humbling honor. And the other thing that's interesting is people now, and I'm not even Pittsburgh famous. I'm like 0% famous, but occasionally my photo will be in a newspaper, and that weekend people will come up and be like, do I know you? And I'm like, I don't think so. And then they saw my name in the paper, but the reason I remember them is that I canvassed at their house on X date in, like last spring. That's the thing I think that's different is just this, like you start knowing people that you're like, I never would have met you if I hadn't run for office. So that's like a non-answer answer.
No, I think it's all true. I mean, obviously everything that you're outlining, that sense of responsibility and the sense of recognition that people have, even though it's a little bit vague, and I'm sure you use the opportunity to talk about the role of the controller's office in their lives, and they're happy to get back in the supermarket line and move on.
Yeah, like please don't talk to me anymore. I'm like, okay, bye. No. But it is really fun. I mean, it's just, I feel so fortunate. I love coming to work every day. I think I drive some of my colleagues in the office crazy because it's like 8:15 on a Monday. I'm like, oh, what are you working on? And they're like, they just want to have their coffee and like get situated for the week. And I'm just super excited to be there. So I love work. I mean, I just feel really lucky to be in a position where I'm able to serve other people. I love being here in my office all the time. So it's just fun. It's really fun.
Can I ask, you've also, I mean, in your role as elected official, you've been vocal on a number of issues. One of them is antisemitism in the last year. And, I think probably not every controller would step out on sort of broad public issues. Can you talk about how you think about your role as a community leader in addition to being controller?
Sure. So I've known and loved Jewish people my entire life. I feel so lucky to be tied to such a remarkable, small, close-knit community. Pittsburgh's Jewish community is super special. So I've been involved with the Jewish community in Pittsburgh since I was at Pitt. I traveled on Hillel's alternative spring break in 2006. My college roommate was Jewish, or is Jewish. She's no longer my roommate. But I've had these deep connections to Pittsburgh's Jewish community since 2003. And obviously October 7th, there was a terrorist attack in Israel. And the immediate response from a lot of people was actually not one of empathy or sympathy or just heartache. But, we saw statements about this being deserved or, and it's a brutal attack. Like the October 7th attack, when if that happened in the United States, it would have like 25,000 people would have been killed when you look at the size of Israel's population. And it was just devastating. I mean, I've seen raw footage from October 7th via the Israeli consulate. And then there was the Screams Before Silence, the film that Sheryl Sandberg did that I also was able to screen with the Jewish Federation. And I just feel a sense of moral obligation to speak out against hate. So if this was the Islamophobia that happened in the United States after September 11th, I believe that I would have used my voice in the same way. And what we're seeing is just this unprecedented attack on the Jewish community over a war that's happening 8,000 miles away. And the FBI released their hate crime statistics yesterday, and hate crimes against Jewish people are up 63% in the last year. And I feel a sense of just it's necessary. And if I'm the only person, then I'm the only person. But at least that there is an ally that they can look to, and that the Jewish community can look to in city government and say, this is not complete silence. At least this is, there's someone here who sees our pain, sees our suffering, sees our vulnerability, and is willing to say, this is not right. So if I'm alone, then I'm alone. If I'm with others, I welcome anybody in elected office, public office, business, civic, community leaders. But it's regretful if I'm the only person that says anything, but I'm not going to not say something. And then I'll also talk about the BDS referendum, so a group of activists in Pittsburgh circulated a petition that would have forbidden the city of Pittsburgh from doing business with any entity that does business with or in the state of Israel. So my office filed a formal objection in the Court of Common Pleas, which is the conduit to remove something from the ballot. That's just the legal process. And on the grounds of it violating the city charter, state law, and compromising the health and safety of city residents. So An example of an entity that the city would no longer be able to do business with is Teva Pharmaceuticals. And 1/3 of the world's naloxone supply comes from Teva, so it originates in Israel. Fire safety equipment. There are two primary companies. One is Mine Safety Appliances, which is ironically headquartered in Pittsburgh. They're a partner with Israel. Israel's a desert, and so there are fires. And MSA is the primary supplier of fire safety equipment in Israel. And then the backup, there are two fire safety equipment companies in the United States or in the world that our firefighters believe is adequate, and I have no reason to doubt them. And the other one is Draeger, which is a German company, and they sell they sell in the state of Israel. So our firefighters would have been left with inadequate fire safety equipment. Ford, our police cars are all Ford. So we would not be able to acquire Ford vehicles because Ford sells vehicles in the state of Israel. And so we filed a formal objection. Ultimately, what happened is the petitioners withdrew their petition based on concerns over signatures. You have to qualify for the ballot. You can't just be on a ballot. I know California knows a lot about ballot referendums. But so I am hopeful that we have dissuaded these activists from pursuing something that would totally and completely compromise public safety in the city of Pittsburgh. There are concerns around the anti-Semitic nature of it, of such a referendum. I was primarily focused on the public safety impact, and I believe that it would have compromised the health and safety of city residents and city employees.
Well, I have to say, I was telling you before we started, I start teaching a class tomorrow on anti-Semitism at a university. It's been more than a difficult year for Jews around the world, but grateful for your thoughtful leadership in this area. I know it's not easy.
Yeah, it's hard, because it's a war that's 8,000 miles away, but people's unwillingness to decouple. Like, we've had incidents where, kids are in kippas walking down the street and someone throws a glass bottle at them. And it's just, you deserve to go to school.
Well, and especially
people to cry.
Yeah, no. And especially in a community like Pittsburgh, which has experienced the worst of anti-Semitism.
October 27, 2018 was the most deadly anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history, and it happened within city limits at Tree of Life, the Tree of Life congregation, which is a conservative shul in Squirrel Hill. Squirrel Hill is this city's historic Jewish neighborhood, and a lone gunman walked in and opened fire and killed 11 people. And the court case, he was motivated by right-wing hate, and his thoughts on Jewish people was well documented. He had an online presence. And I think anti-Semitism is really insidious and shows itself in ways that other hate doesn't, partly because Jewish people, people don't realize that Jews are an ethnic and religious minority, which is a really odd, because of America being such a melting pot. We have, and I do too, because if I ask my parents, I remember the first conversation we had about ethnicity, like, what am I? My dad said a Heinz 57. And so, with Jewish people, you have this ethnic identity that is really distinguishing in the United States. And I think when we see anti-Semitism manifesting in all these different ways with, we had an incident here where two kids were speaking Hebrew, and non-Jews can also speak Hebrew, by the way. But someone wrote Free Palestine the barista wrote Free Palestine on the coffee cup. And you're like, you're going after this kid. And, we've had tagging of shuls and kids verbally harassed and signs defaced. And I had an incident in my neighborhood, and I don't live in a Jewish neighborhood, but where someone spray painted "For Blood or Soil," which is a Nazi slogan, on a Jewish family's front sidewalk. And like microaggressions turn into bigger aggressions, and they turn into people getting hurt or unfortunately killed. And if you let it start, it's not going to go away on its own. And, I'm proud to be an ally and friend of the Jewish community. And I would encourage anyone else, whoever's listening, to remember that there are Jews in every neighborhood, in every city, rural, urban. And, this is a really, really painful period for folks who are already marginalized. So I'm not glad to be here doing that and needing. I wish it wasn't necessary, but I'm proud to use my voice.
Yeah, and we at the New Deal and are grateful as well. I got to ask because the election is 6 weeks away, and by most accounts, your state will decide who is elected to get president. What's the feeling on the ground? Do you have any insights? What do the rest of us need to know?
So I canvass all the time. I love talking to voters. I've been actually canvassing outside of the city because there are swing state house districts. And the math in my head says if those folks win, it trickles upward. So I have encountered, and I'm in a district. So I worked for Congressman Altmaier for 6 years, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm actually canvassing in areas that we could never win. Democrats couldn't win 15 years ago. And now these suburbs are just trending so blue that it's becoming more and more Democratic and friendly territory for Democrats. So I feel very, very good about Harris and Walz in Pennsylvania, particularly in Allegheny County. Allegheny County had more raw votes for Joe Biden than Philadelphia County. We have an incredible local, we've an engaged, incredible local Democratic base. People are energized. I'll share this because it's embarrassing. I said to a colleague of mine 2 weeks ago, I was like, I said, this just feels like 2008. I mean, and it really, really does. This feels like 2008. There's so much energy. Volunteers are coming out of the woodwork. But my colleague looked at me and she said, I was in middle school in 2008. I said, oh. Okay. And I said, I promise it was awesome. So, but I do feel, I grew up in Cumberland County, which is the fastest growing county in the state. And if you had told me 10 years ago that Cumberland County, I went to Cumberland Valley High School, would be blue, I would have laughed at you. Josh Shapiro, who's our governor, won Cumberland County in 2022. I believe that Janelle Stelson, who is the Democratic candidate and running against Scott Perry, who's the chair of the Freedom Caucus, I think Janelle's going to win. I think Cumberland County is going to go blue, and it's going to vote for Vice President Harris. I feel really, really good about it. The center part of the state has never been, very friendly territory, particularly Cumberland County. But I don't want to take anything for granted. And if anyone wants a place to canvass in the next 6 weeks, find my email from Ryan and I will find you a place to stay and find you a place to door knock. I don't think it's not in the bag, but I feel really, really good about things. And I'm glad people are paying attention to Western Pennsylvania. And I'm glad we have such an energy on the ground because people are canvassing every day.
All right. I'm going to let our listeners hear me knocking on wood. Your words, fingers crossed, come to fruition. And I just want to thank you for your thoughtfulness, and we love having you in the New Deal, and
thank you.
I love having you in office.
Thank you.
I got to say, I didn't anticipate talking to a controller would be as much fun as it has been. So thank you. Thank you for breaking down my stereotypes.
Oh, I'm glad to. Anytime anybody has any questions about budgets or how to digest things, it is less daunting than you would expect. It's important, right? At the end of the day, if you can't afford thoughtful public policy, it doesn't matter. So you need to make sure your budgets work and the math works.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.